When I moved into the small flat across from hers, I didn't even notice her door at first. Just the soft scent of brewed tea that lingered in the hallway, and the faint hum of an old radio through thin walls. It wasn't until a few mornings later, when I was leaving for my shift at the cafe, that I saw her. Sitting on the front steps, tying the laces of her walking shoes, sunlight cutting across her face like a half-forgotten photograph. She looked up, smiled faintly, and said, "You're the one with the music at night." I froze mid-step, earbuds halfway in. "Too loud." "No," she said, tightening the knot on her shoe. "Just nice to hear something new through the walls." That's how it started. Nothing cinematic. Just two neighbors with too much quiet between them. Her name was Lena. She ran a small design studio from home and kept her door open when the air got too stuffy. Sometimes when I passed by, I'd catch sight of her sitting cross-legged on the floor, sorting through papers, her hair falling loose from a clip. There was always a mug beside her, always half full, never empty. I started timing my coffee breaks around hers. It wasn't intentional, at least not at first. But then she began remembering my order before I said it. "You're the oat milk light, right?" she'd ask, already reaching for the carton. I'd nod, trying not to look too pleased that she'd remembered. She had that quiet kind of presence. Not warm exactly, but steady. She never asked too much, never pried. Just noticed things. "You're not from around here," she said once. "You still pause before you cross the street. Like you're not sure which way the cars come from." She wasn't wrong. I'd only been in the city for 3 months, still learning which corner shops closed early and which benches stayed dry after the rain. Most nights I'd sit by the window, phone in hand, typing messages I never sent. To friends who'd stopped replying, to someone I wasn't sure I missed anymore. That evening, she knocked on my door. Her hair was damp from the rain, shoulders wrapped in a cardigan. She held out a plastic container. "Made too much soup." I took it, our fingers brushing for half a second. I remember the way she didn't pull back too fast, just enough to notice. "Thanks," I said, voice quieter than I meant it to be. She gave a small nod, like she was agreeing with herself, and turned to leave. When I closed the door, I realized I was still holding the lid too tight. I set it down, exhaled, and told myself it was just kindness, neighborly, nothing more. But later, when I washed the container and left it on her doorstep, she texted, "You didn't have to clean it." I typed back, "You didn't have to make soup." Her reply came a few minutes later. This could end badly. I stared at the screen, heartbeat tapping against the quiet. Then I typed. Before I could think better of it, or perfectly. The message stayed there, blue and seen, for a long time. I half expected her to laugh it off, or send a smiley. She didn't. Through the wall, I heard the faint sound of her radio stop. Then silence. That was the night I realized the space between our doors had started to feel smaller than it should. She didn't reply that night. Not with words, at least. But the next morning, when I opened my door, a mug of coffee sat on the step, still warm, steam curling in the cool air. No note, just that small act, quiet and deliberate, like an answer that didn't need to be spoken. After that, things shifted in ways that didn't look like change to anyone else. We didn't text again. But she started leaving her window open when she worked, and sometimes, when I walked by, she'd wave me in with a flick of her hand. I'd help her move stacks of sketchbooks or hang frames that leaned against the wall for too long. It became a rhythm. My hands doing small things in her space, her voice filling the silence. One afternoon, rain blurred the street outside. I stayed to help her bring in the laundry before it got soaked. She laughed when the wind caught a bedsheet and wrapped it around my head. It was the first time I'd heard her laugh. Really laugh. And I remember thinking I could live off that sound for weeks. When the last of the clothes were gathered, we ended up sitting on the couch, barefoot, 2 mugs of tea between us. She leaned back, the soft fabric of her sleeve brushing mine. "I used to hate the rain," she said suddenly. "My husband loved it. Said it made the world honest." I turned slightly. "You were married long." 14 years. She said it like she was reading from a label she'd long stopped caring about. "He died 5 years ago. I still find his umbrella in the trunk of my car sometimes." I didn't know what to say. So I just nodded, staring at the steam rising from my mug. I didn't mean to make it heavy, she added softly. You didn't. But something had settled between us, not heavy, not light, just real. Later that week, I caught myself checking the hallway before leaving, hoping to see her. When I didn't, I'd stand there longer than I needed to, pretending to fix my keys. I told myself I liked her company because she listened. Because she asked questions that didn't sound like small talk. But sometimes, when her hand brushed mine as we passed a mug, or when she smiled just before saying my name, I'd feel a pulse of something else, something both wrong and right. That night, I heard her laughter through the wall, softer this time, maybe on the phone, maybe not. And for a moment jealousy threaded through me. Sharp, quick, absurd. I turned off my music, sat in the dark, and hated that it mattered. The next morning, I found her struggling to carry a box to the curb. Without thinking, I reached out and took it from her hands. Careful, she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. It's heavier than it looks. I could say the same about you, I replied before I could stop myself. She paused, eyes flicking up, searching mine, then laughed quietly, shaking her head. Flattery from a boy next door, she said. Dangerous combination. But when I handed her the empty box, our fingers touched again, and neither of us pulled away. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. It started feeling different when she stopped opening her window. A week passed, no wave, no tea, no quiet music through the walls. Just the hollow sound of my own routine. I told myself she was busy, that people have lives beyond coincidence. Still, every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, I looked up. Every time a door shut, my stomach nodded, too hopeful, too quick. Then one afternoon, she appeared at my door again. No smile this time. Just a soft knock and a hesitant, "Do you have a minute?" She held a lamp with a broken switch. "You're handier than me," she said, "or at least younger." The joke didn't land. Her voice was lighter than her face. I fixed it on her dining table. Small task, too much silence. She stood close, arms crossed, eyes on her hands instead of me. "Sorry I've been gone," she said. "You don't owe me an update, I know," she murmured. "That's why it's easier to say sorry." I looked up then. The kind of glance you regret instantly because it finds too much truth. There was exhaustion in her eyes, but also something else, like she'd been trying not to think about me and failed. Later, while testing a lamp, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "Say hi to Lena for me. Haven't seen her since your graduation." I froze, thumb hovering over the screen. She saw my expression. "Something wrong?" I showed her the message. Her lips parted slightly, then she gave a small, careful laugh. "Ah, I forgot your mother and I were part of the same crowd once." The air thinned. I suddenly saw the full weight of it. How it must look, how it was. I was the neighbor's son. The boy who came by too often. She seemed to read my thoughts. "See, that's what I meant by badly," she said, almost whispering. The silence that followed was long enough to make the ticking clock sound louder than breathing. I reached for the lamp switch again. "Something to do with my hands." "Lena," I said quietly. "I don't." She interrupted, but her voice cracked. Her fingers brushed mine as she took the lamp. Not a full touch, just the ghost of one, and that was somehow worse. She turned away, but her breath caught halfway. "Do you ever think about how small this building is?" she asked, still facing the window. "Every night, for a heartbeat." She didn't move. Then she exhaled, slow and heavy. "Go home, Daniel," she said, "before we start mistaking kindness for something else." But when I reached the door, she spoke again. Quieter this time, almost to herself. "I'm not sure I'd stop you if you stayed." I turned then, half a step between leaving and something else. Her eyes lifted, met mine, raw, searching, afraid. It would have taken just one move. A reach, a breath, a risk. But the radio on her counter crackled to life, an old jazz tune, sudden and loud. She startled, breaking the moment. We both laughed softly, reflexively, pretending it hadn't been anything. But when I left, my hands were still trembling. For a few days I tried not to see her. It wasn't avoidance. Exactly, more like self-defense disguised as patience. I told myself space was good, that maybe she'd been right. That kindness and something else could look too similar in the wrong light. But every evening, I still listened, for her footsteps, the clink of her mug, the soft creak of her floorboards above mine. The absence of those sounds became its own kind of noise. It was late on a Sunday when we ran into each other again. The kind of night that smelled like wet asphalt and quiet decisions. She was locking up her door, coat unbuttoned, hair tied too quickly. Couldn't sleep, she said when she saw me. Me neither. We ended up walking, no plan. No words for the first few blocks. Just the sound of our shoes on the pavement and the sea wind curling around the streetlights. She stopped by a bench near the water. The boards were damp, but she sat anyway. I joined her, close enough to feel the warmth from her shoulder through my jacket. You stopped coming by, she said finally. You stopped opening your window. Her lips curved slightly. So we're even. I waited for her to say more, but she just watched the horizon, a thin gray line between dark and darker. Then, quieter, it's not you, Daniel, it's just I've been here before. Not exactly like this, but close enough to know how it ends. Ends. With someone getting hurt. I wanted to tell her that not everything needed to end badly. That maybe this could be different, but words felt clumsy next to her silence. She drew her knees closer, elbows on them, head tilted like she was listening for something under the wind. My son would have been your age, she said suddenly. He died before he turned 19. Car accident. I turned to her. She wasn't crying, not even close. Her face was calm, but her voice had softened in a way that felt too intimate to look at. I think that's why this feels wrong, she continued. Not because of you. Because it feels like I'm borrowing time that isn't mine. I didn't know what to do with my hands. They just rested on my knees, fists half closed. You're not borrowing, I said quietly. You're still here, she smiled then, small, pained, almost grateful. You make it sound simple. Maybe it is. Her eyes lifted to mine. That look, the one that starts as curiosity and ends as surrender. I felt the air change. The closeness felt like standing too near a ledge. Her fingers brushed my sleeve, stayed there a second longer than usual. Daniel, she started and stopped. The pause stretched. Wind moved through her hair. She looked away first. If I ask you to stay, will you? I didn't answer. Couldn't. The question just hung there, trembling in the space between us, louder than any confession could have been. And that's where we left it. On a bench by the water, both pretending not to notice how close our hands had come. After that night on the bench, something shifted again. Not a rupture, more like a curtain drawn halfway. She didn't disappear, but she began moving through days differently, quieter than before. Her window stayed shut. Her hallway lights, once left on till midnight, went dark early. When I texted her, just a simple, "You okay?" the message stayed undelivered. No reply. A week passed. Then too, I told myself she needed space, but the silence started to feel like a verdict. I'd catch myself lingering outside her door, pretending to adjust my bag, listening for the radio. Nothing. Once, I thought I heard her voice through the wall, soft, muffled, different. A man's voice followed. I froze mid-step. It wasn't latter, exactly. More like a tone I hadn't heard from her in months. Careful, polite, almost nervous. The next morning, she walked by me in the hallway, phone pressed to her ear. She gave a nod, a small, distracted smile like I was someone she used to know but couldn't place. And that stung more than anything she could have said. Days turned into weeks. I stopped walking by her building as often. Started taking the longer route to the cafe. Still small reminders clung to me. The smell of her tea, the faint dent her mug had left on my windowsill from that night she'd borrowed it. Once, I thought about knocking, just once. But my hand froze inches from her door, because what would I even say? I missed something we never named. Instead, I went home and opened my phone. Drafted a message, deleted it, wrote it again. I don't know what changed, but I keep checking for your light at night. You don't have to reply. I just needed to say it. I didn't send it. A few days later, her door was open, boxes stacked near the entrance. She was kneeling by a shelf, packing sketchbooks into a crate. I stood there too long before saying her name. She turned, startled, then smiled. That polite kind again. "Hey," she said. "Didn't think you'd be around." "You're leaving, just for a while," she said. "There's a client up north who needs hands-on work." Her voice stayed even, practiced. But I caught it, the faint tremor beneath it. You could have told me, I said. She hesitated. I didn't want to make it harder than it already was. I nodded, staring at the floor, trying not to ask the questions that wouldn't change anything. That night, I sat by the window with my phone again. Her apartment was dark now. Outside, the streetlight flickered off, on again, like it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. I opened her chat, thumb hovering over the keyboard, typed 3 words. "Are you gone?" Then I erased them. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. And maybe that was worse, being caught mid-story, with no one left to turn the page. It was almost a month before I saw her again. I was leaving for work when her car pulled into the lot. The same old silver hatchback with a dented bumper. She stepped out, hair shorter now, carrying a box that looked too heavy for one trip. She froze when she saw me. Then, like nothing had happened, I nodded. "You're back. Just for a few days," she said. "Finishing up here before I decide what's next." We both smiled, or something like it. The kind of half-smile that's more about politeness than joy. That evening she knocked. The door. I left something behind. When I opened it, she wasn't holding anything. She looked tired, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the kind that sits behind the eyes. "Tea," I offered, before thinking. She hesitated, then nodded. "Sure." We stood in my kitchen, the same silence as before, only heavier. I filled the kettle. She leaned against the counter, watching the steam rise. "You redecorated," she said, glancing around. I moved the couch. Made it look like I had my life together. That earned a quiet laugh. It was enough to make me breathe again. When I set her cup down, our hands brushed. Neither of us moved away. She looked at me then, properly, like she hadn't in weeks. "I thought about calling," she said, "a few times. But it felt unfair." "Unfair to who?" "To you." "To me? I don't know." The kettle clicked off, but I didn't move. "You don't have to protect me from wanting something," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Daniel." She started, then stopped. "You're so young." "So are you," I said softly. "You just forgot." She laughed again, quiet, breathless. Then the laughter faded, leaving something fragile behind. "I used to think I was done with all this," she said. "The wanting, the waiting. Then you showed up with your music and your terrible coffee habits, and suddenly everything I'd packed away started moving again." I swallowed. "That sounds like a bad thing." "It's not." Her voice dropped. "It's just dangerous." We stood there, 2 mugs cooling on the counter, the silence pressing close. "I don't know what I want this to be," I admitted. She nodded slowly. "Neither do I. But it's something." There was a long pause. And then, she reached small touch. Fingers against my wrist, tracing the faint pulse beneath the skin. "I don't want to hurt you," she whispered. "You won't," I said. "You already didn't." She smiled then, real this time, warm and tired and full of all the things we hadn't said. "Okay," she murmured. That was all. No promises, no kiss. Just her hand still resting on mine, and the kettle cooling behind us. The kind of quiet that felt like an ending. Or maybe a beginning, if either of us were brave enough to call it that. Spring came quietly that year. No big shifts. Just sunlight through her window again, the faint hum of her old radio returning through the wall. The building seemed to exhale, like it had been holding its breath for both of us. Lena didn't move north after all. The client job wrapped up and she stayed. Though she never said it was for me. I didn't ask. Some things feel smaller once you name them. Our routines began to fold back together, piece by piece. She'd leave her window open again in the mornings, and I'd wave through the glass before heading out. Sometimes, when I came home, there'd be a mug on the step, still warm, steam curling in the dusk air. No messages. No notes. Just the same silent understanding that had always been ours. On Sundays, we started walking again. Not every week, not planned. Just when the air felt soft enough to carry conversation. The bench by the water had new paint now, chipped in places, the initials we'd once carved faintly visible under the fresh layer. One evening, she pointed at it and said, "Guess we're still here." I smiled. "Wes, so?" She poured tea from a thermos into 2 small cups. "No oat milk this time," she said. "I'm growing up," I said, grinning. She rolled her eyes but smiled anyway. That same tired, gentle smile that had undone me the first time I saw it. We didn't talk about what we were. Maybe because there wasn't a word for it that didn't ruin the softness of what we had. Sometimes she'd still pull back a shadow in her expression when a song came on the radio, or when she saw something that reminded her of before. Once, she said, "You make me forget how quiet I've become." And I said, "You make me remember it's okay to be quiet." It wasn't love the way movies told it, no declarations, no chaos, just presence, just knowing someone's light would still be on across the hall. Months later, I started keeping a second mug in my cupboard, the same shape, same size as hers. At 8:47 a.m. each morning, I'd hear the familiar sound of her kettle through the wall. Sometimes I'd knock once, softly, and she'd knock back. That was enough. There were days when we said nothing, just passed each other in the stairwell with a glance that meant more than language could hold. Other days, she'd hand me a thermos for my shift, pretending it wasn't hers, and I'd pretend not to notice the tea tasted the same as always. A little too strong, just how she liked it. I don't think we ever decided anything. We just kept showing up. In small ways, quiet ways, real ways. And maybe that's what perfect actually looks like, not in the moment that begins everything, but in the ones that don't end it. When I see her sitting by the window now, radio low, sunlight on her face, I think, this could have ended badly. But it didn't.